On alert, state borders slammed shut to Victorians in a bid to stop the spread of coronavirus.
There will be queues, there will be frustration, there will be lots of questions, but we're doing this to keep everybody safe.
Farmers' frustration, new laws and tax incentives spark shortages of an essential piece of equipment. And the frightening ordeal that turned out to be the perfect excuse for getting out of a speeding fine. Hello and welcome to ABC Regional News. I'm Miriam with a look at what's making news in regional and rural Australia. Well, more than 5 million people are back in lockdown following a spike in coronavirus cases across Melbourne. Premiers and chief ministers have slammed their borders shut to Victoria and imposed tough quarantine measures on anyone who's travelled through or returned from the state. The outbreak is expected to have a significant impact on the national economy, and many businesses may be forced to close their doors forever. Well, one area on the front line is the border city of Albury and Wodonga. Anna Speedy is the Mayor of Wodonga. She joins us now. Anna Speedy, welcome to ABC Regional News. You've been navigating that border crossing for the past couple of days there between Albury and Wodonga. How is that working and how are residents feeling there?
Look, I think residents were pretty accepting. You know, we knew that this had to come in. We want to keep people safe. But day three, and we're starting to get pretty frustrated when we're seeing, 40 and 50-minute queues at peak times. Sometimes we're really lucky and it flows okay and you can kind of get across the border in about 15 minutes. But it's definitely impacting our businesses and our people.
So queues of some 40 to 50 minutes, you're saying there's still some 3 days or more after the closure was put into effect. So how is that affecting the way the community functions when it comes to accessing services, going to work and, of course, for those businesses depending on tourism?
Yeah, so you've got to remember there's 100,000 people between the two cities. We have more than 50,000 car movements every day. We've got services such as Centrelink and our hospital sitting in Albury, and yet we have the maternity wing sitting in Wodonga. So we have people traversing for work every single day. But our very vulnerable groups are really struggling through this process. We've got queues at our libraries just trying to print off the permit to be able to get across so that they can get to their medical appointments, etc. So it's pretty stressful on the community, and I guess the frustration is really lack of answers. And yes, the Premier of New South Wales was correct. Not only do we have queues, we have lots of questions.
So how challenging then is it to coordinate the cross-border situation from a logistics perspective? You mentioned there people needing to print out their permits is just one issue. When we talk about the fact that we've got different state agencies involved as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Mayor of Albury and I have been working incredibly closely, contacting our respective governments, but we're sort of having to go through several chains of command to be able to get changes to process and certainly to be heard. You know, we've seen closures of small bridges in some of our rural shires. That means that emergency services can't get through. So we're trying to feed the local information in. It has been incredibly challenging. And while, I've been on the phone to Minister Allen every day and she's been very, very receptive, sometimes feeding that through into the New South Wales side has been a challenge.
So when you talk about issues around clarity, what specifically are you wanting there?
Well, I guess we're going to need to see some clarity if this is going to continue for some weeks. This community, and I say one because that's how Albury Wodonga operates, needs some more certainty and some more clarity. We've talked about should that borderline not be between Albury and Wodonga, should it be north of Albury, given New South Wales is monitoring it. We need this one economy to be able to work. Absolutely, we want to keep people safe, but we also want to keep our businesses open.
And Anna Speedy, what concerns do you have about the longer-term impact of the border closing, particularly when we take into account how tough this year has been for those regional communities already, when we have no certainty about when the border might reopen?
Yeah, look, we've been drastically impacted by bushfires early in the year. COVID, I guess, just like everywhere else in the nation, but this absolutely adds another layer of complexity and impact. I know there's been more than 1,000 people a day cancelling from our snowfields. We've had no tourism trade. I look around my city today and it's really quiet, as is Albury. So, we need to be really conscious that this region can continue to work really well even without tourism, although that has a huge impact. But to not be able to just operate on a daily basis for basic services and necessities is near on impossible.
Well, Anna Speedy, it is an incredibly resilient community there for Albury, Wodonga and, of course, around the country. We appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. We do wish you the very best as these tough times continue.
Thanks very much.
Well, in response to the need for people to cross the New South Wales-Victoria border, a permit system has been introduced. Our reporter Josh Bavis takes a look at how the process should work and just who will be able to get one.
Closing the busiest border in the country isn't going to be easy.
The last thing you'd want to see is the two largest states have to shut down their activity, and that's a risk that was posed to New South Wales had we not taken this action.
There are close to 55 ground crossings, including the Hume and Princess highways. The Hume alone typically has about 10,000 vehicles crossing every day. About 1,000 defence personnel and police will be deployed, making sure everyone coming into New South Wales is checked. Even drones will be used to make sure no one crosses illegally by foot. While it may be disruptive, there will be exemptions if you need to get across.
There will be queues, there will be frustration, there will be lots of questions, but we're doing this to keep everybody safe.
People will still be allowed to travel across the border, but only for certain reasons and with a permit. Exemptions will be made for those living in a border town, freight drivers, emergency services, fly-in, fly-out workers, or on compassionate grounds. All applications for permits will need to be made online at the Service New South Wales website. New South Wales residents can still travel to Victoria without an approved reason, but they'll need to apply for a permit to return and self-isolate for 2 weeks. Crossing the border without a permit could land you with a fine of $11,000 or jail time, with on-the-spot fines of $1,000 for lying on a form.
Police will have powers to demand details from people. We'll have the powers to turn people around at the border. We will have powers to issue a fine, or on-the-spot fine, or charge people.
All the major airlines are expected to significantly reduce their daily flight schedules between the two states. Josh Bavis.
At the other end of New South Wales, the border with Queensland has finally reopened to anyone other than those from Victoria. But if you want to travel north, you'll need to apply for a border declaration pass. Authorities are urging drivers to consider changing their travel plans to avoid long delays.
It will not only help the local community up in northern New South Wales, but help yourselves, because being stuck in traffic, and when you're excited going on holidays or wherever you're going, it's not the most pleasant thing to do.
Drivers will need to show their ID at checkpoints. In other news, a ban on live cattle exports in 2011 almost led to the collapse of the industry. Almost a decade on, the Northern Territory's peak primary industry body is calling on the Commonwealth to drop any possible legal action, which could stop the flow of compensation to those hit hardest.
Road train driver Scott Gillespie knows the blokes of the NT cattle industry aren't much for sharing their feelings. But in 2011, he could see it in their faces.
A lot of worrying blokes, what was going to go on, a lot of people sort of just worrying about what was going to become of it, if it was going to end.
A temporary ban on live cattle exports to Indonesia by the federal Labor government saw jobs across the NT dry up overnight. Scott's wife Steele saw her parents on Dorisvale Station near Katherine suffer during the ban and in its aftermath.
Years later, after that, it did get really hard. We just had cattle just sitting around. We couldn't get rid of them for years.
Last month, the federal court handed down a landmark decision that the ban was unlawful, handing a victory to a class action against the Commonwealth by hundreds of cattle producers. During the past week, the first compensation for lost wages was awarded, nearly $3 million to the lead applicant, NT Pastoralists Brett Cattle Company.
It's been an incredibly long and arduous journey for that family. So we're seeking closure not only for the Bretts, but for those businesses right across Northern Australia.
Hundreds of cattle industry workers, from farmers to truckies and tradies, could now be eligible for a share of around $600 million worth of Commonwealth compensation. But an appeal is still possible, and the Attorney-General, Christian Porter, says the government hasn't yet made up its mind on whether to fight the court's ruling. When the ban was enacted, this road train company lost 30% of its business overnight. In the ensuing 9 years, the northern pastoral industry has battled drought, cyclones and now coronavirus restrictions. Industry officials say the time for closure and compensation is now.
People from the land, and in particular from the cattle industry in the Northern Territory, are incredibly resilient, but even their patience gets tested over time.
It's been a long 9 years, this fight, and we don't want to spend the next 9 years fighting an appeal in court.
If an appeal is lodged, the Commonwealth has 3 weeks to do so, before the deadline on July 27. Matt Garrick, ABC News.
Still on the land, and retailers are struggling to keep up with a massive surge in demand for quad bikes ahead of new regulations to improve safety set to come into effect next year. In response, some manufacturers are opting to cease selling their vehicles here, with many farmers wondering how they will run their properties without this essential workhorse.
The day begins with the turn of a key at Ben Bennett's dairy farm in southwest Victoria.
Every day, 5 o'clock in the morning, I get up, I sit on a bike. I'd be spending nearly 1,000 hours a year on a bike.
When he recently heard some quad bike dealers were running out of stock, he ordered 2 new bikes.
That's nearly 2 months ago and still haven't received them.
And it's a similar story all over Australia as orders pile up.
Right now in Australia, there's no motorcycle dealer with a quad bike left in their shop to sell. The ones behind me here are all sold. I've got absolutely nothing left.
Manufacturers say demand has been double, sometimes triple, what they'd typically expect.
It's beat any end of financial year, it's beat any Christmas, it's beat everything. Demand is absolutely amazing.
Farmer confidence is up and tax incentives are helping too. But there's speculation another reason is also driving demand.
We really think it's the awareness that these products will finish is the major contributor to what we're seeing at the moment.
From October next year, all new quad bikes sold in Australia must be fitted with operator protection devices or roll bars. Some major manufacturers say they won't meet that requirement, and so they're withdrawing from the Australian market. But that doesn't mean that other brands of quad bikes won't still be available.
It's absolutely integral to my business, no different to a carpenter's hammer or a meat worker's knife.
So as long as the cows need milking, the need for bikes is likely to stay strong. Kath Sullivan, ABC News.
Wine grape growers across the nation have recorded their smallest vintages in more than a decade. Now, after years of drought, summer bushfires and extreme heat, some producers fear they won't be able to survive.
The vintage of 2020 is like no other. Drought and bushfires left many growers across smaller wine production areas with significant losses. The Tyrrell family recorded one of the driest harvests in their 162-year history.
And so the crops were some of the lowest we've ever seen this year due to that prolonged drought period. But then also on top of that was the bushfires.
Devastating summer bushfires left many growers in the Hunter Valley with smoke-tainted grapes. The Tyrrell family lost about 80% of their harvest.
The impact is huge, to be honest. There's a huge loss of revenue into the future.
The 2020 wine vintage report has confirmed this year is the smallest vintage in 13 years.
We've had widespread dry conditions. Australia had the driest winter on record in 2019, so that was a big part of it for many regions.
While growers and winemakers in the Hunter Valley were hit hard by drought and bushfires, producers in Australia's largest wine region, the Riverland, battled frost, hail and extreme heat.
There was a major hailstorm here in the Riverland, but the biggest challenge was again high temperatures and also for a lot of growers the high price of water.
There has been some good news, with average wine grape prices increasing 5%.
So the reduction in value overall was only down by 9%, which is not too bad.
But that might not be enough to save winemakers who have been pushed to the brink by drought, bushfires and the pandemic. Jessica Schremmer, ABC News.
There are calls for a national approach to managing brumbies as their numbers in the high country skyrocket. Victoria, the ACT and New South Wales currently have different policies for dealing with the issue. In the Kosciuszko National Park, there's no clear consensus on the best way forward.
Treasured Australian icons or destructive feral pests? For Richard Swain, there's no question.
What's happening up here is a disrespect of landscape and a non-courageous decision.
That decision was the passing of the 2018 Brumby Bill, which recognised the cultural heritage of wild horses to Kosciuszko National Park and prohibited their culling. Numbers are instead controlled by trapping and rehoming. Brumbies that can't be rehomed are sent to abattoirs.
What we've achieved in New South Wales, a balanced approach in reducing numbers in the most sensitive areas of Kosciuszko National Park in a humane way that has brought both sides of the debate together.
But Brumby numbers haven't reduced. A survey last year found the population was booming, up from 6,000 5 years ago to around 20,000. And experts say their hard hooves are destroying the alpine ecosystem and driving native species to extinction.
The problem with trampling is that this moss just can't take it. A few passes of horses through here and suddenly there'll be a muddy track through it.
If the horse numbers density continues to rise, then basically the horse wins and the rest lose.
Alan Lanyon has been defending the plight of the Brumby for decades.
It very much is a war, but sadly at the end of the day Kosciuszko National Park suffers because we can't get broad consensus on any particular issue.
There seems to be agreement among people who live in the high country that Brumby numbers in Kosciuszko National Park are too high. What they don't agree on, though, is what to do about them.
They needed to be culled. The numbers, as far as what I can see, are out of hand.
Trapping and rehoming, definitely.
Parks Victoria is currently facing legal action over its plans to cull 600 wild horses. There are now calls for a national Brumby management plan.
It's definitely time for the federal government to step in and follow the science, do what's right for this country.
But what's considered right depends on who you ask. Rosie King, ABC News, Kyandra.
Isolation has been top of the mental health agenda this year, with many Australians making big sacrifices during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's an issue remote cattle stations have been grappling with for decades, and on a property in Queensland's Gulf Country, they've been developing several strategies that may help others in a similar situation.
The day starts early on remote Woodstock Station, where business and pleasure mix in the dawn light. Jade Lord moved to the area from Brisbane 8 years ago and brought yoga with her.
I didn't realise the health and the mental benefits that it was actually giving me until I was missing it.
Sensing others in the vast region were craving the same outlet,
Good morning, ladies.
the mother of two started online classes for the bush, and business is booming.
Even the actual physical yoga practice, it's the space and it's the conversation that is actually created when we're all together.
Building a strong sense of community is also important for the station, with about 20 employees living several hours from the nearest town.
I did a number of years working out on stations before I came home, and I know the best of them were the places where you always felt like you were really part of the family.
Most of the workers rely on social media to keep in touch with friends and family.
You know, a lot of these fellas are here, they love the work, they love the environment, love the people, but everybody still has a heart which might be connected to somewhere else, and I think being able to keep in touch with that is pretty important.
But staying connected can be tricky when you're this remote. Hundreds of kilometres from the nearest town, there's no mobile phone coverage, and the internet comes from a satellite. And while there have been improvements in these services over the years, the connection is still a long way behind the cities. Sick of the dropouts, one local grazier built his own internet.
First of all, we hooked up our station, but then the neighbours said to us, oh, we wouldn't mind being able to do that too, and it grew from there.
It now covers more than 20,000 square kilometres and softens the challenges of living in the bush. but not for the Lord family, who live outside its footprint.
We just roll with the punches and we just work with it and do the best we can.
Eric Barker, ABC News, Richmond.
NAIDOC Week celebrations may have been postponed, but that didn't stop members of the Stolen Generations meeting up for a special brunch in Darwin. It was an eagerly awaited outing for many people who've been left isolated during the pandemic.
Good food and even better company. This brunch for members and family of the Stolen Generations was a welcome gathering.
COVID-19 has been very tough for our people because they're all at that vulnerable age. So they haven't been able to get out and about.
And you can see how happy they are because they're actually able to talk to so many of our other people here.
Organisers say it's important for these people to get together with others who understand what they've been through. Eileen Cummins was taken away as a 4-year-old and says it was emotional for her mother to meet her as an adult.
In the 15 years of rest of her life, I was able to reconnect with my people at Arnhem Land and with my family, with my mother, but my grandparents had already passed.
Others at the brunch were descendants of those who were taken.
My mother was taken from Borroloola, and she was taken when she was 8 years old, and she never saw her mother again. My mother died when I was 8 years old.
For Barbara Nasir and her daughter, it's a story they're determined never to forget.
This is a special day. This is the acknowledgement of my mother and every other beautiful mother that has travelled this painful journey.
Cameron Gooley, ABC News.
Staying in the top end, the body responsible for protecting sacred sites in the Northern Territory is investigating potential offences in the area of a popular waterfall in Kakadu National Park. There are concerns about the path to the clifftop pool at Gunlam Falls, which has been closed for more than a year. Whether or not a sacred site near the pool was impacted during the construction of a walkway late last year is the subject of an investigation. Despite near-perfect weather every day and breathtaking sights, the coronavirus shock has left Western Australia's Kimberley region without tourists. To entice more people back this winter, Broome is building on the traditional sunset camel tours by investing in technology to bring the prehistoric past back to life.
This tour group is among the first to explore the Kimberley's popular beaches since the pandemic shut down access. They're trying out a new way of looking at ancient tracks left by dinosaurs from another time.
Just over here.
It's a powerful experience to place your hand on the spot where a relative of the Tyrannosaurus rex walked more than 100 million years ago. But it's even more powerful to see the dinosaur that left indelible marks here.
To fathom the fact that these 130 million years movements back then are still here and evident today. It's crazy to try and grasp. This 360 visual graphic gives you that understanding.
Studies of more than 15 types of dinosaur tracks left in the sandstone have been used to create a three-dimensional dinosaur landscape. It's hoped this vision, created by a community management group including traditional owners, will help to promote and protect Broome's dinosaur trackways.
Tell you, Ben, it's amazing what this animal looks like in real life. Yeah, it's going to be mind-blowing from a track to what it looks like there and how high and how much teeth and the colour of it.
This region has been hard hit by pandemic travel restrictions.
It's no secret that our industry up here in the Kimberley in particular is in crisis due to COVID. This app is perfect. It's perfectly timed to be released, and we look forward to being able to promote it and showing people how amazing it is.
The potential for these tracks to reboot the Broome tourism industry is just the latest chapter in a 130 million year history of adding to the rich culture of this part of the world.
Ben Collins, ABC News, Broome.
In a true test of Australian ingenuity, an ocean drone has completed a 100 nautical mile unaccompanied journey, sailing between Sydney and Ulladulla on the New South Wales south coast. The feat is the result of 20 years of dedicated work by environmentalist and inventor Robert Dane to develop an autonomous boat.
Affectionately known as Bob the Bluebottle, this ocean-going drone is being touted as the next generation of border protection. It's the brainchild of a South Coast doctor.
These drones are bristling with different sensors under the water and above the water. So the idea is that if somebody comes illegally into our economic zone for fishing or for other purposes, then they've got a good chance of being detected by these platforms.
Powered by wind, waves and solar energy, the unmanned vessel is capable of patrolling vast distances without having to return to shore to refuel.
Well, there's a number of other ocean drones that can run for a limited amount of time at sea, but the great thing about this drone is its endurance and its eco-friendliness.
Earlier this year, the company was awarded a $5.5 million contract by the Department of Defence to develop a fleet of 6 drones. The team has been testing Bob the Bluebottle over long distances before building the rest of the fleet.
It's taken a couple of prototypes, but the latest voyage between Sydney and Ulladulla has been a success. Now the OCS team will build 5 more vessels ready to roll out next year.
He's sailed really well, which we have seen before, but he, to make the journey, he's barely spent any energy on the motor. He's just been able to sail all the way along, which is pretty awesome.
While on patrol, the drones will also be collecting vital weather information, sailing into cyclones to measure their intensity, and even forecasting tsunamis.
You need people to go out in boats to do exciting stuff, but there's a lot of dull and dangerous work that can be done by a robot with humans sitting safely at home, drinking coffee, going home to their families at night.
Exploring new frontiers from a distance. Jessica Clifford, ABC News, Ulladulla.
And finally, when it comes to excuses for speeding, police have pretty much heard it all until the tale of Jimmy and the snake. A 27-year-old Queensland man was pulled over for speeding on the Dawson Highway west of Calliope. An eastern brown snake hitched a ride in his ute and started striking at the seat between his legs. Fearing he'd been bitten, Jimmy said he had no option but to kill it and rush himself to hospital.
I think it's bitten me. It was in the car with me. Like you can feel my heart, mate.
You found a snake in your car?
There was this brown, it's in the back of the tray, mate.
Luckily, Jimmy managed to avoid its venomous fangs but was treated for paramedics for shock. Needless to say, he was let off for speeding, but police did warn him that snakes are protected under the Nature Conservation Act. That is the latest from ABC Regional News for now. You can keep up to date with all the latest on the news channel, online and on ABC Radio. I'm Miriam Corowa. Thank you for your company.